When we're referring to folk herbalism, basically what we're saying is that the herbal practices that we have now come from different traditions around the world, rooted in indigenous culture and people who really lived closely with the land and understood the interconnectedness between themselves and the earth. Part of the medicine of the plant is your relationship with it. The relationship that you're building is really what's giving some of this profound healing. It's not just, okay, I put a salve on a burn. It's like, okay, I've sat in meditation with this calendula flower and I've listened to her and allowed her to touch me in these ways, energetically or emotionally. I love talk therapy. I'm a strong proponent of mental health and things like that. But I think there is a limit to how far we can go with just our mental, intellectual processing. And at some point, we have to move from the mind to the body. And I think that's what the plants really help us to do, is to drop into the body and connect with parts of ourselves that maybe feel a little scary to be in, or slow down in ways that we don't really do as much, especially with the rise of technology and how much we use screens. I think that there are different plants for different people at different times in their lives. Sometimes there are kind of lifelong allies, like, when you're a kid and you loved lavender and then you get older and you still love lavender. And so it's kind of this like lifelong teacher. But then I think there are times when there's medicine that you really need from a plant that you're going to feel more drawn or maybe even repelled, depending on if you're not ready for that kind of healing.
Hi, friends. It's Donnabelle, your host of To Hum is Human, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of tuning into our intuition to express our passionate purpose. I'm so glad you're here today. In this episode, Roots and Rituals, Herbalism for the Modern Soul, we explore what it means to reclaim our relationship with the natural world and how listening to plants can help us listen more deeply to ourselves. Because what if the medicine you've been searching for has been right beside you all along, in the plants growing in your garden, the herbs on your shelf, and the earth beneath your feet? I'm so excited to introduce my next guest. Shannon Mitchell is a folk herbalist, intuitive medium, and writer who believes healing begins by slowing down and listening to the earth. Through her practice, Shannon Mitchell Wellness, she guides clients in creating practical, self-directed paths to well-being. Her work invites people to rebuild their relationship with plant medicine, deepen their connection to nature, and weave herbal wisdom into the rhythms of everyday seasonal life. Her other great love is writing, which she shares on her Substack, Unraveling with Shannon, and on Medium under Shannon Mitchell Writes. There, she explores the intersections of healing, relationships, culture, and even existential dread, always with humor, honesty, and vulnerability. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donnabelle. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, you've said you're often talking to plants. Do you remember the first time a plant spoke back?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think one thing I want to say when I say that I am talking to plants, just so people don't think I'm on the verge of some kind of mental collapse, is that it's more of a feeling or a knowing. So when I was young, I was maybe 6 or 7, and my mom had a huge garden. She had sunflowers, vegetables, fruit. We had fruit trees. Our yard was basically filled with everything she had planted. So I remember the sunflowers were probably my first ally, is what I would say. I just would feel this sense of safety and joyousness being around them, which I'm sure some people can relate to when they see sunflowers. So I think it was when I was a kid and I started to realize I felt this kinship or this draw to plants and how they made me feel.
Well, if you've ever gotten or received flowers, or you've just walked by flowers, there's something about them that really just brings this simple joy. And sunflowers specifically, because of how they really do kind of remind you of the sun. I just bought some sunflowers from the Tuesday market the other day, and They just made me so happy. So I can see how sunflowers would make such an impact on you. And plus, you get seeds afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's so many layers to sunflowers. But anyway, you speak about folk herbalism. Can you explain what that means for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're referring to folk herbalism, basically what we're saying is that the herbal practices that we have now or that I'm practicing now come from different traditions around the world of people who have practiced herbalism. So different cultures, and a lot of herbalism is rooted in indigenous culture
Mm,
and people who really lived closely with the land and understood the interconnectedness between themselves and the earth. A lot of the medicine that we use comes from their knowledge and has been passed down in specifically in Western herbalism. A lot of what we know in Western herbalism in the US is from Native American peoples and American Indians who lived here. There's also other traditions like Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine. So there's all these traditions of practicing medicine, but folk herbalism itself is kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different cultures and practices that originated in different parts of the world.
Well, at what point, aside from the experience you had with having an incredible garden in your backyard, what led you to really then focus and hone the understanding of what plants are and mean to us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for a long time, probably for 5 or 6 years, I had been getting nudges from the universe. I had a longing or a pull to study plants. Like you said, I loved being outdoors. Had always been in the garden. I already worked with plants, but I wanted to formally study. And so I studied under Marisha Miranowska. She runs the School of the Sacred Wild in California. And so I was doing it online, but I did an apprenticeship and she taught us not only the medicinal uses for plants and here's what you can use this for, here's what people traditionally use this for, but also how to communicate with the plants and hear what some of their messages are and get to know each of their own unique signatures and kind of voices and songs. And a lot of that we did through meditation and ingesting the teas and really being in our bodies, really coming into our bodies and getting familiar with how the plant wanted to be in relationship with us. So
Mm.
seeing them as like kind of sentient beings.
I know there actually has been studies and experiments where they have measured how they react when we come into their vicinity. Like they're fully aware of when a human comes into the room, or if the person who tends to them is nearby, they perk up. Like it's a fascinating study. And so I can only imagine when you are intentionally coming into a place where you're working with plants and really seeing them for their medicine, their wisdom.
Absolutely. I've seen studies like that too, and I totally agree. It's so fascinating. It's so incredible. I talk to my plants all the time. I talk to all my flowers and all my veggies and my house plants. I think part of it too is, and this is what Marisha would say in our apprenticeship, was that part of the medicine of the plant is your relationship with it. Your unique relationship and the relationship that you're building is really what's giving some of this profound healing. It's
Mm,
not just, okay, I put a salve on a burn. It's I've sat in meditation with this calendula flower and I've listened to her and allowed her to touch me in these ways energetically or emotionally. um, which I think I love talk therapy. I'm a strong proponent of mental health and things like that. But I think there is a limit to how far we can go with just kind of our mental intellectual processing. And at some point, we have to move from the mind to the body. And I
mm,
think that's what the plants really help us to do is to drop into the body and connect with parts of ourselves that maybe feel a little scary to be in or
mhm,
slow down in ways that we don't really do as much, especially with the rise of technology and how much we use screens.
mm. Absolutely. You don't just use herbs, you grow them, tend them, and listen to them. What types of plants do you grow? Because I know you live on this beautiful farm, so I can only imagine what that would be.
I grow a lot of different things. I grow a lot of herbs, obviously. Yarrow and calendula. I grow holy basil or tulsi. I grow sage, a lot of kitchen herbs that you would use in cooking. But then I also grow medicinal herbs like arnica or motherwort and nettles. Because we have like a more rural property and we live on a farm, essentially, like you mentioned, a lot of these herbs grow already, like lamb's ear and things like mullein and things like that. They already grow on their own. So some of them I can just wild harvest, and they're
Mhm.
very bountiful.
Mhm.
Some of them I have to cultivate because they're not perennials. We grow a lot of those and then we do a lot of flowers. What we hope to do in the next season or two is establish a flower farm where people can come cut their own and get their own herbs and things like that. So we grow zinnias and cosmos, sunflowers. We do lobelia. What else do we have out there? Oh my gosh. I have snapdragons.
The
Yeah,
colors must
it
be
could go on.
amazing. The
Yeah.
colors must be amazing. I mean, to be able to just look out into the field and see all those different plants and textures and the way in which they're growing together, it's almost like you're painting a landscape with plants, right? With
Yes.
flowers. And I think there's something so beautiful and intentional about that. Now, is there a specific plant currently that you're in conversation with right now? And if so, what is it teaching you?
Yes, that's such a great question. Yeah, because I think to your point, just to kind of take that further a little bit, I think that there are different plants for different people at different times in their lives. I think sometimes there are kind of lifelong allies, like when you're a kid and you loved lavender and then you get older and you still love lavender. And so it's kind of this lifelong teacher. And I think there are times when there's medicine that you really need from a plant that you're going to feel more drawn or maybe even repelled, depending on if
Hmm.
you're not ready for that kind of healing. So right now I'm really working with calendula quite a bit. It's a flower, bright yellow. People have probably seen it before, bright yellow orange. You can use it as like a plant dye or flower essence, but I've been using it a lot for digestion and speaking truth and personal power. So because of
Mm.
its color, it's really supportive to our solar plexus and the seat of our willpower and our courage. And so I've been using it a lot as I'm now getting back into writing and, practicing using my voice and putting myself out there. She came back in my garden on her own. I didn't cultivate her this year. It's technically an annual. I didn't cultivate her and she came back. So I felt like, okay, it's time for us to work together again. So
Mm.
working with her as a tea and making some salves.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I've seen calendula all around, and it's such a beautiful flower in itself.
I know.
And I've heard about the healing properties of it. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now, in your work, herbalism isn't just about tinctures on a shelf, it's about daily seasonal living. Can you walk us through how your year looks when it's organized by plants and seasons and not calendars?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say that a lot of folk herbalism and specifically kind of the way I practice with the herbs is definitely has some pagan echoes and roots around it. So it kind of looks at the year in that wheel around harvest and winter and deep time and then spring and summer full exaltation and then kind of back down again, right? And so I like to use plants that attune with the energies of the season. So, for example, in the fall, we're going to start shifting downward. We're going to start
Mm.
slowing down. It's going to start, depending on where you live. I live in the Northeast. It's going to start getting colder. Immunotonics like elderberry or mushrooms, reishi, things like that are going to start to become more important. Roots helping us ground and kind of rest and hibernate ourselves so we can rest and not go into the new year feeling burned out. And then consciousness shifters. So things like lavender or nervines that help support the central nervous system and relax us while we're in that kind of liminal space of winter. And then we have bitter herbs that wake up the digestion in the spring, like dandelion or cleavers. And then in summer, we have cooling herbs like mint, hibiscus, things like that, and a lot of
Mm.
flower energy. So I feel like when we can align some of like the teas, the foods we're eating, the practices, maybe journaling and going inward in the winter and then being out in the garden and out in the sun in the summer, those things feel like they help me reconnect with the season itself, not just the plant.
It's such a mindful way of living because most of us are used to schedules, used to the calendar, but not in the sense of natural cycles. It's really about, okay, it's time for school or it's time for summer, busy, 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 busy. It's just a different way of looking and pausing because if you really do notice subtle shifts in what's happening in the landscape around you, just noticing now, wow, the light's really changing. It's starting to feel a little
Yes.
cooler in the morning. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's really is starting to feel like fall is just around the corner. What does that mean? And how do we shift? Or do we just say, oh, it feels like fall, and then we just continue going about our day, right? Which is
Yeah.
typical, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think there was two interesting things you touched on, which the first thing, we feel it, right? It's a feeling we have because we are a part of nature. I know that we've gotten so technologically advanced that we tend to forget that sometimes, but we are a part of the land. We originate from the earth. We'll go back to it when we're done with our journeys here on earth. But I think we forget that we, for thousands of years, were so attuned, so heavily reliant on nature, on the seasons, on the weather. We
Mm,
have this instinct about, oh, okay, it's that time. It's becoming that time. And I think that's part of why it feels so good to start having warming spices in October, cozying up with a book, because we know it's getting to be that time. It's not like, oh, let me go party like we do in July. It starts to shift. So I think there's that I wanted to say because I thought the same thing this morning with the light. I was like, oh
mm.
my God, but it's like fall.
I played tennis this morning and it was freezing. It
Yes.
was
It was
really
like
cool.
52. We went
Yeah.
we went for a run and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god, it's fall." Yeah, and I think the other thing you mentioned just about this, we kind of tend to just go about our day or we don't maybe necessarily notice the cycles. We're just like, "Oh, it's time to go back to school or it's time to do this." Michael Pollan said something really interesting on a podcast I had listened to a while ago and he commented on the fact that things like technology, like electricity, like caffeine, all of these things have enabled us to basically defy nature,
Mm,
to start living in the opposite or the adverse of nature versus the way we once did. If you were by candlelight, you weren't going to be shopping in a store, right? That has shifted how we live. We still have to do some inquiry around how does it impact us in the
mm,
long term if
mhm.
we continue to live as if there is no cycle.
Yeah, there is a sort of timelessness, although everything's by time. So it's kind of this weird conundrum, striving and driving to meet a deadline or something, but
Yes.
not really understanding what's happening around us and just being outside and exploring. The other thing too is when we think about plant medicine and some people who are listening to this podcast, a lot of people immediately go to like psilocybin or they
Mm.
go to ayahuasca because that's also not season based, right? So I'm just curious about what your stance is on that.
So that's so funny you asked that question. I have this conversation with one of my good friends a lot. I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll try to make it as concise as I can. I think that one of the tenets of herbalism is to do as least amount of harm as you can, the most harm reduction that you can. And so I think in the case of something like ayahuasca, these are very deeply sacred medicines to indigenous peoples in South America. And of course, it's their choice if they want to share their medicine with Westerners or anyone who visits, right? That's not for me to say. But it is a very endangered plant.
Mm,
I think what happens sometimes is in the West, in our search for enlightenment or connection, we fall into the same capitalistic or extractive cycle that has made us feel so disconnected in the first place. And then we kind of just pivot it and apply it somewhere else. So, okay,
mm,
I feel kind of empty or disconnected. I'm going to try this plant that I feel like will awaken me or enlighten me or make me feel a sense of belonging or deeper connection without realizing how this is being sourced, without realizing how it's impacting the communities who use this for their sacred practices and have for thousands of years, right? So
mm,
I think sometimes we get confused about what it means to really deeply connect. And because we're so disconnected from sourcing in the West, we don't see it that way. This could be causing harm. But I know in the case of ayahuasca, they've had to have tribal meetings around the excessive use of it because now
mm,
it's becoming a problem. So
mm,
I think that's how I feel about herbs like that, where it's like, I think we can use other herbs. We don't have to use this specific medicine
Mm.
to find what we're looking for. But then in terms of the psilocybin, when I was a teenager, I recklessly did a lot of mushrooms and it was really fun. And I feel like it expanded my mind and I saw the horizon and all these things. But now, at this point in my life, in my mid 30s, I don't really use any kind of psychogenic medicine. And not because I have a problem with it, but just because I can have deep or profound experiences in healing without even needing to use that kind of medicine. I can have a great experience with something like dandelion or find a lot of release and grief work with motherwort. So I don't necessarily need to use the psilocybin.
Mm.
I think it's great for certain people who align with that medicine. If that's the medicine for them, or I know it's really helpful with PTSD, do it, go for it.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I do think with moderation and being aware of how we're sourcing and like, am I abusing it? And when does a search for meaning or seeking enlightenment become kind of just abuse or escapism? And being aware of that.
I think it's a fascinating discussion because it's so much in the fore right now in
Totally.
conversations about plant medicine in general. Because it's been infiltrating and saturating the market in so many ways, it's hard not to have a conversation about it because it really is part of scope of scope of the work to a degree. Now, I'm also curious too about particular plants that have been used in indigenous medicine, such as sage, that is
Hmm.
all over the spiritual wellness community, and knowing that there are actually other things. And because you're saying it's like, I can have an equally powerful experience with this without having to go there. I think a lot of people really don't understand that there's so many other ways that they can have ritual and have connection without necessarily ascribing to something else that's not really relevant to them in some way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm glad you brought up sage. I think that is such a perfect example. Some of the search for wellness or healing, anything under that umbrella of kind of growth and internal change, we're a little misguided around like, these are the ways we get there. Like, we use sage because this is what we're going to use to cleanse and this is what everyone else has used and it's become really big in the wellness space, but we don't understand the roots of it. We don't understand the origin. We don't understand the lineage. That's such a big, vastly important part of partaking in any medicine that we use is
Mm,
understanding, how is this used? Who is this used by? Why was it used? And now, how is it extracted now? Because I know white sage is over harvested. It's taken off of reservations without permission,
mm,
right? Then we think about, okay, so now I'm going to ingest a plant or I'm going to use a plant in ceremony for good, in my mind, for healing, that has caused suffering or loss for someone else. So for me
mm,
to have this plant in my ritual, someone else has had to lose. And that's what I think is a really fundamental thing to understand. An important part of this is that I don't think people do this maliciously. I think they don't have an education or understanding around how these things came to be. I'm not exempt from that. 16-year-old me was burning a wand of sage, waving it around, like doing my little witchcraft. I'm not here to be like, I've never done these things. Like, of course, I had no idea. I was ignorant to it.
mm,
But then when we do know, then I think it's important to be responsible and act ethically and with integrity moving forward, educating
mm,
others, using other plants. You could use lavender, you could use mugwort, you could use pine, cedar. There's so many other things you could burn
mm,
for cleansing
mhm,
that don't have to be sage, or grow it yourself. If
mhm,
you want to use white sage, just don't buy it, just grow some
mhm.
in your garden.
Yeah, and it's as with anything where you feel like their intention is part and parcel of the practice, it's about also making conscious decisions about what you use and how you use it. It's always a fascinating concept most people take for granted. So it's always nice to just like, oh yeah, well, just maybe think about where you're sourcing your materials, going into it that way. Now, on the other hand, some people approach plant medicine with skepticism, others with longing, obviously. But how do you help people move from curiosity to trust?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think part of it is just personally, when I'm teaching classes or I'm working with clients, I'm not here to convert you. Firstly, I'm not going to try to convince you to convert you. I'm just here to help provide you with tools and information and resources so that you can reach your healing the way that you want to. Because I'm not the expert on anybody else. They're going to take what works for them, and certain herbs are going to work for somebody that are not going to work for someone else.
Mm,
So I think with the curiosity, I like to really just see what has your experience been with the plants? What has brought you to this? What is drawing you to this? What are you hoping to learn or to find here? What are you looking for? 'Cause I think people go to plant medicine
mm.
when they're seeking healing, or they've tried Western medicine and it isn't working, or they're like are kind of witchy, or right. Like there's a couple different categories, I would say, of people who I find that are looking into plant medicine. But I really just make sure that they know I'm not going to try to cure or solve or any of that. I'm just going to help you learn how to build your relationship with the plants and listen to the plants so that you can reconnect with yourself and find the healing that you're looking for.
Through your practice, Shannon Mitchell Wellness, you support clients in developing practical, self guided approaches to healing. Could you give us an example of what that entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with people two ways. I created a course. So I teach a seasonal herbalism course where we learn about the herbs, and I do it in the fall, the herbs that we're going to use in the fall, just because that feels like we're going back to school. We're starting to slow down. We have time. We're not going to a pool party every week, that kind of thing. So each week we do a different topic in self healing, and then we align that with different plants, and they get to meet the plants, and we do live plant meditations, and then they have self-guided courses and worksheets and videos and things like that. And then the other way is just one-on-one with clients who are looking for herbal mentorship. They want to learn about the plants, how to use the plants, and then they also are looking for protocol to go with that. They have something going on they're working through, whether that be physically or emotionally. And then I do an intuitive plant reading for them and just see what would like to come in for you, what plants want to work with you. And what's funny is the intuitive plant readings actually then kind of just become intuitive readings. They're not just the plants.
Hmm.
And I think I had told you about that when we had chatted, but then they started becoming family members or messages from spirit. And I was like, oh, this isn't just the plants. That's usually what I use to work with clients.
Well, it's interesting because my next statement was you're not only listening to the earth, but also to spirit. When did you discover that part of yourself?
So I think I was always like empathetic. I was always an empathic kid. I was very sensitive, had a lot of feelings. But then as I got older and kind of grew up in a chaotic home, the main feeling I felt was anger that I would say cast a shadow over trusting my intuition and the messages. So when I got into the plant medicine, my teacher had helped train us in how to do intuitive readings for people in herbalism, because she said it's important to give them protocols that align with what they need physically, like making sure it doesn't contraindicate with medications, practical things. But it was also like, I want you to feel into what this person needs in terms of what plants want to come in. And so we did that. And so I was doing those readings and practicing with my peers. And then one day, I was doing a reading and I started seeing like a movie. That's how kind of the messages come into my head. I see them. And this movie came in of this woman. She was shaking out bed sheets, white bed sheets. I just saw the hands. I didn't see who the person was, but I knew it was a woman. And she was like, pressing them and shaking them, and they were all embroidered, and she was hanging them on a line. And I was describing it to this person, and I was like, "Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what they're showing me." And she goes, "Oh yeah, that was my grandmother. She was a laundress, and I have all those embroidered sheets she made in my closet." And I was like, "Whoa!" So I think that's what started happening. Like other messages started coming in, and then people would confirm it to me as that's so and so. And I was like, "Oh, okay. So family members are coming in. This is actual true mediumship, not just the plant mediumship." So
Mm. I mean, what a fascinating and surprising way of entering into that
yeah,
practice. It sounded like it was a total surprise because I was
totally.
wondering if when your mediumship and herbalism intersect, are they two rivers or are they one?
That's such a great question. It feels like they overlap. Like when you're saying, are they two rivers? It does. It feels like they're two rivers, but then they meet,
Mm.
because I'll get messages about sometimes about the person's body, or they'll show me hot spots in the person's body. I'll be able to ask,
Mm.
this is what they're showing me. But then a family member might come or a plant might come they'll show me a plant like, oh, this is how this plant wants to be used for you for this thing. Then the family member will come and say, kick that guy to the curb. I would say an integrative approach that I'm getting from spirit, which is like practically physically you can use this plant, but also you need to go do yoga or you need to have boundaries around your work life, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's such a nice added bonus.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
The clients be like, "Oh, great. I was
Yeah.
looking for some insight on that." Now, you're also an incredible writer, and I
Thanks.
love that you're doing so many projects. And on your Substack, Unraveling with Shannon, first of all, I love that title. You
Thank you.
write about healing relationships and existential dread with humor. What role does humor play in making these heavy things more digestible?
Thank you for asking that. I think that's a great question. And I think, juxtapose existential dread with humor don't always seem like they go together. But I would say I have always in my life used humor as a coping strategy. I struggled with depression for a large portion of my life, and it was always humor that helped me. And I will say at times it was maybe like too much of a coping strategy or crutch. I think that in the wellness community, especially now, I think there's so much ego and so many people taking themselves so seriously. And sometimes I'm just like, "Oh my god, like give it a rest." It's not that serious. And I think there is a place for ritual and for ceremony, right? And for us to be in touch with our grief or our deeper emotions. But I also think that there's room for play and that it can be funny. And I think humor makes things accessible to people. I think
Mm,
humor relaxes a room, it relaxes a person, it relaxes a practice, right? Especially if people feel nervous or anxious or unsure. You crack a joke and you kind of feel the exhale. You feel
mm,
that kind of relief, right? That, oh, okay, the pressure isn't here as much. And I feel like when I think about the plants, it's about joy and connection and laughter and play. And yes,
mm,
they hold us in our grief and our sorrow, but I feel like I want there to also be levity to some of
mhm.
these things.
Mm, and I agree about joy. There's something about when we bring it into a situation, even I'm assuming too, like timing has to be appropriate,
Definitely.
obviously. But but it's a way in which we can all relate because we all know what that feeling is, right? And if we can just bring a little bit more about and play is such a critical part of just being creative and just being yourself. I have to sometimes remind myself to play a little bit because life can kind of be a little serious too. Now, do you see writing as another form of plant medicine, like words as a tincture or story as a salve?
Oh, yeah, I feel like it's written medicine. It's just written
Mm,
medicine, right?
mm,
I love Mary Oliver,
yeah.
and her poems are just so oh my god, she has a line in one of her poems that's like, "When death comes for me like an iceberg between the shoulder blades," and that line is like, oh my like, I have shivers
Yeah.
when I read that poem. She talks about when death comes, and it's just one of my favorite poems. When I read something really poignant, I feel seen. And I think that a lot of the time is connection people are craving. Like, oh, I'm not alone in this experience. I'm not alone in this world. And this person has gone through this too. And their writing either gives me permission to feel what I'm feeling or gives me courage or gives me reassurance. And so
Mm.
I absolutely feel like writing and words are medicine in their own right. And yeah, I think you said something when we were talking about humor about how it's like a universal language. And I think writing does that too. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've loved writing since I could do it.
Well, it comes naturally to some people,
That's
which I
true.
appreciate in you. Words do have energy, like they carry resonance. If you think about the words we speak and what kind of energy they bring about into the world, to be mindful about what that is. Now, you've also contributed to the book, The Intuitive Entrepreneur Deeper Connections for Soul Driven Success with Deb DeSalle. And without giving it all away, what's one way your intuition guides you with your practice, Shannon Mitchell Wellness?
I would say one of the ways my intuition guides me is knowing what kinds of plants are going to be allies for people. I read for them, but sometimes when I meet a person and feel into them a little bit energetically, I'm like, "Oh, this would be great for you," or I feel this plant would like to be around you or something. What's very validating is that sometimes I'll ask someone, "Hey, there's a plant that I think wants to come around. Can I offer this to you?" Because I'm never going to unsolicited be like, "Let me tell you about this plant." What's validating is that that's happened to me with things like rosemary, and I've told someone and they're like, "Oh, okay, well, my mother's name was Rosemary and she had a rosemary plant right outside her door. And that's something that's an ally for me." And I was like, okay, cool. Well, they're showing me they want you to burn it as like a sacred smoke. So
Mm,
I feel like it has helped me most in connecting with and helping other people. I think that's what it guides me most, or how I use it most is like, how can I help support this person's healing or give them some closure with something?
mm. Well, what's the question you most wish people would ask you about plants, spirit, or healing, but rarely do?
That's a really good question. I think I wish people would just ask, like, how can I make this easy to do in my day to day life? I think people want things that are easy to do. They want things that are practical, but sometimes they don't have the words to express, like, I'm not going to take a tincture every day. I know myself, I'm not going to do it. Can you show me or tell me a different way to use this plant or be in relationship with this plant, even if it's not ingesting it or whatever, that could help support my healing? Because often it's me who has to say, do you drink teas? Will you do this thing? Because the point of herbalism, in my opinion, is not to make it so it's this mysterious, inaccessible thing where people have to make all these potions to have it be successful, or I guess for it to work. It's for them to be able to be in relationship with it in the ways that actually resonate with them, so that they'll actually use the plants, or they'll actually sit with the plants, or they'll cultivate plants, whatever it is that's going to bring them what they
Mm.
need. So yeah, I think that's one that I wish people would just say, what's the best way for me to use this? And me to be like, here you go. This is what I think could work for you.
Well, and I can see, like, perhaps coming into your space and just seeing all the plants, it might be a little overwhelming to people, right? So they don't even know where to begin. But it's nice to know that you're open to, like, just make it easy for me. I really
Yeah.
just need some help with this. Now, looking ahead, what feels like the next seed you're planting in your work or your life?
Oh, I love that. It's such a juicy question. There's like a couple parts, but is it okay if I give you kind of a multi-pronged
Absolutely.
answer? Okay. So for our house and our property, because we bought a fixer upper and this property that had been really fallen into bad disrepair, and we've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. Literally, both my fiance and I have stepped on rusty nails. Like, just like
No,
crazy things have happened. But
I've got a solve for that.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But yeah, so our next thing for our property, after 2 years of listening to the property and watching, I decided I wanna have a flower farm. I think that's how I wanna use this land, and also to have an event space and things like that was our vision, to have community and also be one with the earth. So having flowers and having herbs and then having people be able to come and enjoy it and walk the grounds and use the property and use the barn and that kind of thing. So that's a seed that we're planting. We're literally starting our beds like now for
Wow,
next spring.
exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting, it's tiring and exciting. So we're doing that, and then I think business-wise, really pivoting back to my writing and just feeling more confidence in sharing what I have to say and owning the fact that, like, yeah, I work with plants. I work intuitively with plants, and feeling unafraid to share that, because I wouldn't say it's necessarily socially acceptable yet to be like, I talk to plants. I think it is in some circles and with communities. I think it's growing and
Mhm.
expanding, but there's still a lot of self consciousness there for me and like wanting to be accepted. So
Mm,
it's like I have some things to work through in
mm.
this coming year, in terms of wounds and not being afraid to be myself, my full self. Uh
Yes. Well, and stepping into your authenticity can be a little scary, but obviously there's something there for you that just is not going to go away. And the
yes.
more you give it opportunity to show itself, I also think too, I think now in the times that we're in where people are seeking alternative ways to healing, that they are trying to find people like you. And the more that you can give them to help them research or find you. I think that's more valuable too in ways that hopefully will give you the courage to really say, well, here I am. I know people are looking for me.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I agree that there's it can be scary to step into our authentic selves, but I do agree with you that that was funny when you said it won't go away. No, it's not going to go away. In fact, it's just getting louder and clearer.
Right. Well, and it's so funny because this whole podcast was a message for me to kind of share stories where people do step into their authentic selves, where they
Yeah.
actually listen to the nudge, but then act on it and
Yeah.
then look at what happens afterwards. And it's been such an amazing journey listening to everybody's stories because they come into it in so many different ways and at different times in their life. And you're literally on the precipice. You're ready
I
to dive
know.
in. And I
I
love it.
know.
I love it. I love it. And it's going to be amazing. Now, where can folks find you and all the amazing things you offer?
So, people can find me through my website, shannonmitchellwellness.com. And they can also find me on my Substack, like you had mentioned, Unraveling with Shannon, and my Medium, Shannon Mitchell Writes, which I think eventually will consolidate to just on one, Unraveling with Shannon. And then my Instagram, Shan Grows Plants. So I do videos of my garden, of me with my flowers, talking about herbalism stuff, making jokes,
Love it. Love it. Love it. So many ways to find you.
Yeah.
Shannon Mitchell, thank you so much for sharing your stories, your laughter, and your medicine with us today. I learned so much already about dandelion. So I'm just like,
Oh,
oh my God.
yes.
I mean, you've really
That's
shown us
great.
that healing doesn't live in some faraway place. It's literally in your backyard, right here, in the
Totally.
plants that you grow and around us, and in the rituals we create. So
Absolutely.
I feel like plants are always guiding us back to ourselves, and I appreciate you being on the show today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure. And yeah, I appreciate every question. They were just such great questions, and you commented so beautifully after. And yeah, I love what you said. That's exactly it, is that healing can be found in our own backyards. Right. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I hope something from today's conversation stayed with you or gave you a new way to look at things. That awareness, that pause, that's where things start to shift. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need it. You can learn more about my work and what's coming up at sonorouslight.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at @tohumishuman. Until next time, keep humming.